So welcome everyone to the OWN conference, Co-Creating Our Future Stories of Hope and Action. And this is a local asset and strength-based OWN conference. I hope that you have sign-ups for several sessions. So this one in particular, we will be looking at an analysis of like 6 power ladders, wheels of OR progressions. We have sent actually a paper that is like the basis for the conversation, the slides, and also some materials for the harvest. You just have to go to the chat and then to the very top of the chat to find those materials if you cannot find them in your email.
You might,
yes.
You probably need to post them again, because if people joined after you posted it, they won't be able to see it.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I'll do that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So we will just have like some introductions and overview for the session. Then we will divide about like 6 people in some break rooms, and in the break rooms, so you're going to be discussing the first like unknown ABCD ladders for about 30 minutes. And then we are going to be like coming back and having like maybe like 3 people that will say something about it. Then we will go back into the break rooms, a different group, and then this will repeat, but with like the ABCD ladders. And when people are coming back, what we need is just like some volunteers, maybe 3 volunteers, that will talk about what was like their discussion, what they found interesting. Then at the end, Mark will lead a discussion about the comparing and contrasting the ladders and thinking about maybe even making a new one or some ideas that you might have on that regard. My name is Iris Garcia, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Utah, and I'm also a faculty of the ABCD Institute with Mark.
And thank you, Ivis. I'm Mark Chupp, and I'm at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio in the US. And I am in our School of Social Work, and I direct our Community Practice for Social Change concentration and have a small center called the Community Innovation Network, where we do strength-based approaches to change.
We also wanted to have some acknowledgements. So like Michelle Duscombe, I think she's here. She's like from the organizing team. Also Dee Brooks, and I believe that John McKnight, which is the founder of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute, is also joining us today. So thank you very much. So now we wanted to do some introductions, but we cannot like have everyone introducing themselves in audio. So we just wanted to use the chat, and some people already started to do this. So each person will just like put their name, their organization, and their country. So just take a little bit of time to do that. I would like keep the conversation going, but just make sure that you do that. So we want to capture who was here in this session. So the idea for this session actually like started from an email trail that we had among the faculty of the ABCD Institute. And we noticed that we had like these 3 ladders, but nobody has actually like written about them. So we wanted to track a little bit of the history, like who did them, where they come from, and also like just put something in writing from the ABCD Institute. So we have like, these are like the 6 ladders that we are going to be like discussing. So the first 3 ones are non-ABCD, and we will break rooms to have a discussion about them, and then they will come back for the next ones. And Mark will be giving an overview in just before we go to the break rooms. We are going to be doing a harvest, and so I sent a sheet that it has like some questions for each one of the wheels or like progressions or ladders. We need a person that will be a note taker once you are in the break room. So if you can find a note taker and also like put the names of like everyone there, and you can email those to me. I will send that while Mark is like introducing the ladders, but basically my email is there and you can return the notes. Unfortunately, even though we are recording the session, the break rooms are not recorded, so we just wanted to make sure that we capture all of your ideas. Another thing is that if you can, once you're there, take a screenshot of your group. If you don't want to be in the picture, you can just like not put yourself on video, but it'd be nice to have a picture of who was there. And these are the 4 questions that you will be discussing. What is the history of this ladder? How it has been used by participants? What is great about this ladder? But also what are the shortcomings and how it could be improved? And we are particularly interested in that part. So at the end, we will think about some ideas that you might have to like mix and match some of these resident progression ladders. We also have some overall reflection questions, and you will have like about, let's say 10 minutes to discuss each ladder, but overall we also want you to answer what are some of the stories and experiences shared, what were the key themes that emerged from these experiences, what was your most significant learning from this session and why, and was there anything that surprised you or changed you? And these are questions more that actually the host of the whole conference gave us. Because every single person that is in this conference will be reflecting in these like 4 questions. So I already like talked a little bit about the break rooms. So each person should introduce themselves, identify a who will be the harvester, and then make sure that somebody is keeping track of having a discussion about 10 minutes per ladder. And I will just put in the chat again the PowerPoint and the readings and the harvest material, so you have that with you once you're in the group and you can use that. So Mike, if you want to discuss the first ladders for the break room.
Okay, so the first 3 ladders are not related to ABCD, but they do deal with participation, sometimes called citizen participation, sometimes called resident participation. But the notion is everyday people participating. And these ladders focus mostly on process. They're not focused on the individual, but on what is the process. So I think we've all been very familiar with the Arnstein ladder of citizen participation. One that is less known is the South Lanarkshire Council's Wheel of Participation. And then the IAP2 one is also well known. So looking, I think the next slide goes through the Arnstein one, right? You're on mute, Eves. Yeah. So, okay. So Sherry, this is for you to think about. These are the questions we want you to think about. But this is Sherry Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation, which starts at the bottom, which talks about manipulation and therapy as not true citizen participation, and then moving up to what she called, and this is you know, a very old ladder from the 60s, tokenism of informing, consulting, and placation. And then moving up the ladder to a higher level of power is the partnership, delegation power, and citizen control. And so the notion is that public process uses different ways of engaging people along this ladder. And so it's a way of creating those categories. The second one is actually more of a planning process from the South Lanarkshire area in the UK. And it has 4 major areas, starting on the right, of more of the information level, and there's 3 levels within that of how information is shared. And then the second level is more of a 2-way process where it's actually a consultation level at the bottom, where it could be limited consultation or some kind of customer care or actually genuine communication and integration. The third level then is more of a dealing with participation and at that level. And so then we go to the IAP2 one, and you've seen this probably before. This is well known. Some of the same categories across the top of informing, consulting, involving, some call that participation, to collaboration and empowerment. So we'd like to have you talk about your experiences with these ladders in the breakout rooms and how useful they are, and how you've been able to use them, what you like about it, and what the shortcomings are. And then we'll do the same thing to the ABCD models. And I see David is asking if the slides can be emailed, and they were emailed out to those who pre-registered. And there's, I think, a link that Evis is going to share now.
Yeah, I emailed the slides, and also I emailed the reading and the harvest. So just make sure to look at your email, and also at the top of the chat, the very, 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 very top, because otherwise it's hard to find. You can see those 3 resources. So one of them is harvest.
But you have to
yes.
post it again, Evis, because if you joined after you posted it, they can't see that. You can only see the chat after you've posted.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I
anybody
will,
joined after you posted it cannot see that.
okay, so while I do that, I don't know if there's any questions, Mark.
Yeah, I can do that. Yep. And we have 31 people in the session right now, and so we'll break into probably 5 groups, so that we have about 5 or 6 people in each group.
So I just posted then the PowerPoint, the reading, and the harvest is just the sheet that the note takers will use. And I believe that you have to actually like get those in the main room, because they are not really available once you are in the small break rooms. So just make sure that you find those. And I'm going to do the break rooms. And
you want to tell people what time you want
5.
people to come back? Yeah.
What's that?
What time do you want people to come back?
So it will be like half hour. And I think that we can keep track of that, but we still need timekeepers so you can pace yourself in terms of the discussions.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to send you to the break rooms.
Hear from people. Let's hear from 1 or 2 of the groups at least. What was of value in terms of your participation in the conversation? So we want to hear from you.
I'll start. So we were breakout group 3. In the interest of time, I won't name all of us, but thank you to everybody else that was in the group with me. And just a quick couple of big things that we spent a lot of time on, besides the sort of themes that came up as we talked about it. One was the idea of the 3 models being sort of focused on being used by different types of people. So Arnstein's more focused on how citizens, where the others were focused on either practitioners. IAP2 came out of practitioners, and the Lancaster more decision makers, or at least that was our best understanding. So we sort of discussed the implications of that, and then we also discussed the implications of how looking at that affected sort of the outcomes of the different models. And we had a great discussion about how Arnstein, many people in our group were teachers, so how Arnstein is something that they teach from, where the other ones were more practice-based than necessarily applied in that setting. Although we could see, right, working with a community group, that there was value in talking about Arnstein. But, so I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you. is there someone that would like to add to that, maybe a different aspect of your conversation? One thing that your group did that was not covered in the previous report out from Marie-Joan.
So
Anybody?
me, Carla,
Okay.
to add something different. I think our group also discussed how the ladder was basically drawn and presented, how the graphics communicate the content of the ladder. So this hierarchical ladder for Arnstein, so starting from level of engagement that you should avoid and then going up. And then there was the circular that puzzled us a little bit because we couldn't really, I think the ladder, the content of that engagement strategy and the graphic of the circular was not matching very well, although we speculate a little bit about it. And the third one, that matrix was kind of communicating the possibility that the ladder is not a ladder, but it's a back and forth process where you can employ different level of engagement, bringing forward Arnstein basically approach.
Thank you, Carla. Okay, I think we're ready to go on. Just for the sake of time, we should probably keep moving, right, Evis?
Yeah, if you want to then talk about the next 3 ladders.
And I'm glad to have you join in as well. So now we're going to talk about the ABCD ladders. And I think given that this is an asset-based community development gathering, many of you are probably more familiar with these. The interesting thing is we have learned that they all sort of developed in training and practice ways and haven't been published in a very systematic way, and they kind of build on each other. And so Jody Kretzmann and John McKnight developed the first one, and then Deborah Puntenney, an Asset-Based Community Development Institute faculty member, developed the second one, which has some distinctions that we'll learn a little bit. And then the third one was kind of a combination of those that were used throughout the training process. So if we can see the next slide. What I think is interesting about these compared to the others is that they focus on the individual rather than the community process. And so how does an individual move from victim up through to more empowerment roles? This one has at the top producer that creates the vision and outcomes, which is also the kind of parallel roles to those are a cultivator or maker, and the advocate is in the second level down. And if we go to the next one, we'll see that those are switched. And so the change advocate is at the top. And so maybe advocacy means a little bit different notion here, but this is like a systems change person at the top, and the actor producer is at the level of above that. And some of the terminology has changed a little bit as well. The other thing that's interesting about this one is it actually has identified steps to how to move people from one level to the next, and what you can do as a change agent to help facilitate that process. And then the third one, which we'll look at, we can go to the next slide, Evis. I don't think I can do that. Is an interesting one in that it has definitions and different practices at each of the rungs. So starting at the bottom, not as a victim, but as a recipient of services, and then sources of information, and then to active participants, and then eventually into control. And so that's the notion there. And there's different ways in which these are presented. And so I think we're ready to go back into the groups, and we'll do the same process. And I want to just give a shout out to the harvesters, because I know these are really interesting conversations, and we're going to want to have a way to record those. So thank you, harvesters, for taking notes. And we'll have 25.
About like 10 more minutes just to talk about the 3 like ABCD ladders. And then the next like 20 minutes, I have to leave a little bit early because I'm leading another discussion. Mark will talk about or do like a closing. And in the closing, part of the idea is to compare and contrast, maybe, you know, like the ABCD with the non-ABCD ladders. And then also be able to think about maybe how would you even design your own ladder? I don't know, maybe that's like a little bit over there, but I think that's kind of like the conversation that we wanted to get to. So let's start just like with the 3 ladders, the ABCD ladders, and see like if you can share like from your rooms, what was the discussions that you had there. So I don't know if like we can hear just like maybe one thing from like group 1.
I have a totally unrelated question. Is that
Okay,
is that an elliptical that you're on? Like what?
Oh, it's a little stepper. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Yeah. So anyone maybe like from breakout room, like what was the discussion that you had in there?
I would start if you want, and if my peers in my group want to step in, they are welcome to do so. In terms of comparison, we just reflect a lot on the difference between individual and process. So the fact that those ladders are more individual based, and we try to understand what that entitle basically. So we raised more questions than answers. One of those was if it is an individual journey, the journey to empowerment, if it is really possible to achieve that at the individual level, or in how the partnership with other decision makers or higher institution or whatever, where they enter in that individual ladder. Is summarizing what my group said.
That's a wonderful question. I wonder, like, if in room 2, do you have like a thought about that, or maybe like something similar came up, the role of institutions in empowerment, or even the role of individual?
I'm not sure if people remember what.
I'm sorry. Yes.
What number
so
they're
I
in.
have here Maya or Rebecca, Watts, Jess from Canada. She's like one of the organizers too. And Dr. Joe Carson.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca, you want to say something?
Sure. I was just actually in the process of emailing you the notes, I'll confess. So, we noted a few things, and a number of them were similar to the other group discussion I was in, that there were a number of folks who felt like from their own use of the ABCD ladders that they can be in multiple roles simultaneously, and that there isn't necessarily a need to, it's not necessarily helpful to interpret it as a hierarchy and something you move from bottom to top. And particularly because there's so much diversity and there's change. I think Jess pointed out how their stakeholder mapping changes all the time based on availability, based on different issues that they're working on. So they move around where they are on that ladder quite a bit. So there was some feeling that the linear nature of it doesn't always fit what they feel like they're actually doing on the ground. And there was some discussion of that in the group one I was in as well. So the basic idea is really helpful, but maybe the visual not always consistent with what their experience has been using it. Is that fair, Jess and Maya and Dr. Joe and Magdalena?
Excellent. So let's hear then from breakout room 4. And so we have like there Daniela, Heather.
There's only 2 of us in there, and so I am going to disclose that we didn't stay on topic. We stayed on topic for ABCD, but what we were kind of just struggling with is how we were trying to figure out, because we don't know the ladders, the ones that we were just talking about. The 3 of them haven't seen them before, but we were thinking about how do you apply them? We're both on the ground in the field and applying them. And I said how I apply is for myself in a theory of how I do my work, and I go into the community and I alter them to the context of the community. And use them to help guide the way I am in the community. I don't go into the community and teach them the ladders. And then we talked about more about the asset mapping piece and how does this fit into the individual and the associations and the institutions that asset-based community development talks about.
Right, that was wonderful. I wanted to maybe like in the email share with you all. There's like this great group that ABCD has been doing with the Institute, Museums, and Libraries. And they actually have used the last ladder, which is like residents as recipients going to like residents in control. And they have institutions actually look at their different programs and to see like how much control they give to like people in the community. And I will share that exercise because it's like very cool and it's like a way of like visualizing it for institutions themselves. So I will email that. So let's hear from breakout room 5, which is like Christina, Duyen, Lara, or Ty. I know Mark was there, but he has started now. So.
we were only 3 active participants, and since I took notes and they're in front of me, maybe I'll just share really quickly. Are we supposed to talk about one specific ladder or overall? Overall, right?
No, the last 3 ladders.
Right, okay. I think I'll call attention to just one thing that we talked about last, which is a little bit of the tension between grassroots and institutional levels of engagement and empowerment, because the last ladder shows them kind of moving higher up and participating in, they were participating in focus groups, or no, it wasn't focus groups. It was more of a, I don't have the ladder.
Yeah, I think it was actually, yes.
Yeah, so it was a little bit lower on the bottom. It was focus groups, but then it was moving more up towards kind of like committee. So it moves more towards institutional levels of engagement, right? So getting engaged in government, as we say. So there's a little bit of that tension, and Carolina talked about it with her practice about how to get the grassroots and value the grassroots, but also getting to more levels of empowerment by being involved in what we can consider more traditional roles, right, within government. I think I'll leave it at that. Maybe my group wants to complement it.
Well, excellent. You guys have raised great questions. So now, Mike, I have to go to like another meeting and arrive early. But like he's going to talk about all now comparing and contrasting like all the ladders, and also just thinking about like how you might change them or make them your own. So, Mark, yes.
One of the things you have to do is make me the host, or when you leave, everyone will be, the meeting will end.
Yeah, I think that you were already host.
No, I'm a co-host. You can't leave as the host.
Got you. See, we're like learning here, so thank you so much. My job, the host. Change host. There you go, Mark.
Okay, thank you. All right.
All right.
Okay, now I have the power, folks. Yes, so one of the things that Evis and I worked on is trying to figure out how we would compare these. And so I'm going to share with you from the article the page where we actually map that out. And you may disagree with this, but it's our best effort to try to say, when you look horizontally, how do these compare to each other? And as we've talked about, the non-ABCD ones are more process focused, and the ABCD ones tend to be more focusing on what roles individuals play. I think the last one, the Kretzmann and McKnight with Dobrowolski and Puntenney, is kind of a combination. So I'll give special status to that one. But one of the things you'll notice, I think everybody can see this, right? Is it big enough to see? Okay, thank you, Heather. Is that there's this notion of citizen control or citizen empowerment at the top in most of these. And so they may use similar words, but they might mean different things. And so in being in control, having citizen power or resident power, or being working at empowerment, all seem to be kind of the top there. And then they're midway through, we get into this, what does participation look like? And so they kind of shift around. Some of them focus on kind of active roles of collaborating and being involved, whereas others kind of are less articulate in that middle area. But then they say, if you drop down from that, you become more of an advisor or somebody who is consulted. And so that conveys the notion that you have less agency. It's somebody else is in charge and wants your advice or input, or they consult with you. And then going down even further in terms of power is where it's more of the informing, and there's different models different ladders have different ways of talking about that. Some talk about information flow and exchange, and others talk about it being more of a one-way. And then the Arnstein ladder keeps going down below the informing level, and some of the ladders sort of stop at that, where they talk about what Arnstein calls therapy, which I think is today we would call it more like a venting or complaining role, where someone will listen but not do anything to change the situation. As a social worker, I react pretty negatively to that being the definition of therapy. But this was written in the mid-'60s, so I get that it might be a little bit outdated. And then manipulation, even a more negative term about roles that residents or citizens might play, and that is being played, I guess would be the way to describe it. And then in the ABCD ones, it goes one level below that of receiving services or clients is to the victim role. And in our group, we talked about the the powerful connotation that comes with victim, and that's a status that does convey some level of status that may be used actually as a way of advocating for change, is recognizing a victim status. But at the same time, it can be a very disempowering kind of identity if people take on that role. And sometimes the literature talks about moving from victim to survivor, not in ABCD literature, but in the literature about victimhood and victim status. So those are some of the ways we compared these. I'm going to open it up for anyone to comment on, is this a useful comparison chart? And then we want to talk about, in the last 15 minutes, is what would it look like to actually think about either some kind of integrated approach or a different approach that may not be represented in these ladders. So who would like to jump in? And I can stop sharing the screen. And if you turn your, especially if you're going to talk, it would be great if we could see you at the same time.
I just wanted to make a point with one of the non-ABCD charts that is advocating greater participation, and they're using the term residents in the plural, so it connotes a group. But if you take the S off, then you have that same analysis just from the perspective of an individual in that context. So I think that maybe, you know, there's the contrast between individual and group can be lessened if you kind of do that exercise in your head. For what that's worth.
Yeah, that's very useful. Yeah. Just jump in whenever you want. Is the comparison a useful chart, or is it meaningless or not an accurate reflection?
So I think you should maybe, this is like a great starting point, because you are putting in the same, try to align all the levels. Maybe the next step would be understanding, first of all, providing a short description of each of these levels to see if, and just randomly pick one line, delegation, delegated control, and on governing boards. If these three that are apparently at the same level, they might be different though in the way they are applied. So maybe introducing that, and also I would add the target of the ladder. So Arnstein is for decision makers, the others you know better. You know, starting to actually put down the anatomy of each of these ladders so that you can actually make a comparison that is more in deep. And I don't know if you can do that, but also somehow getting the, somehow evaluating the success of applying this ladder. I don't know how you can do that. Maybe doing some case studies that use clearly these ladders and see how they work. These are my 2 cents for this.
What I heard in that is evaluate the use of the ladders, not evaluate the roles within or the rungs within the ladder, but actually how the ladders are used.
The use of the ladder, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very helpful.
And Mark, I would think it would be interesting to see what these would look like in a cyclical pattern rather than a ladder pattern. Because one of the things we discussed is that there is some movement between roles. not only for the individual, but for the provider as well.
Yeah, we talked about that as well in our group, and we recognized a couple things about that, and I'd be glad for people in my group to respond, to contribute. But the notion that a ladder seems like you move from one to the next to the other, whereas a different kind of configuration might convey the notion that all of these are happening simultaneously. Some have more power than others, but it doesn't mean that you leave one to get to the next.
Yeah, I really appreciate being able to see all of the ladders side by side. I think one of the challenging pieces will be to compare all 6, because I think some of them are speaking different languages. So for instance, with the IAP2 spectrum of engagement, if a community is using that as their tool, you'll have community members who are advisors in that sense. You'll have community members who are leading the charge and being the actors and the promoters. You'll have community members who are just wanting to be informed in terms of what's happening. So I think just being cautious around comparing some that may be speaking very different languages. If the IAP2 is being used for a government, like government to community relationship, then absolutely that spectrum makes sense, where government is the decision-making body, but community members are showing up as victims or clients or actors. So I think just being careful around where things can be compared and where it might be a little bit more challenging, or at least providing a bit of context in how they're being compared and why they're being compared in that way. But I really appreciate being able to see them in this way. There's some new ones that I hadn't.
I think feeding off of what Jess just said, there needs to be a line about the purpose of them, like why they were created in the context, and that might help clarify that, to be able to see it across.
So I'm a lot less familiar with the ABCD, but it seems to me that within the processed ones, the ABCD can happen. I've seen that happen where individuals who are involved in one of those processed ones actually evolve to become change agents and advocates in their community. So I don't know how you would sort of get at that. It's sort of nested within the other one.
One of the things we talked about in our group was the fact that some of these are, in fact, designed to help people think about how to increase participation, and others are more just descriptive. And it might be helpful to think about how to move people. And I'm going to share one, because we talked about not using a ladder. And using something more dynamic than that. And so this is actually, I learned this from Center for Community Change, but it's a community organizing, it's called a concentric circle exercise. And here it's designed for organizers. And so I think you can all see this, right? Is it readable? Yeah. So in the center is a core group of dedicated folks. Outside of that are those who are committed, but not the core group that meets frequently. And these roles are all described. Then you move out from the committed to followers, and then the larger community. And you look at what are the qualities of people that are in each of these circles. And obviously they're smaller because you have fewer people as you move in. And then the activity, once you've identified the qualities, then the next goal is, the next part of the process is to develop a strategy for how many people you want to move to the next level in. So how many people in the community would you like to have moved to become followers? And what are the activities that you could do to get them more engaged? And how do you get followers to actually become committed? and actively participating rather than sort of watching from the sidelines. And what are the activities? How many people would you like to get moved into that level? And what are the activities you would do that would focus on helping them become more active and committed? And if you need more people in the core, how many and what are the activities you would do to get committed people to actually take on more responsibility? So I think it's more nuanced, and I haven't quite figured out how to integrate this kind of thinking into the ladders, but I just share that as one way to think about this. And the other way, I think we talked about it with maybe the IAP2, is maybe it's a pie chart and they're all different roles, and there are more wedges in a pie and a circle. But I know we have some architects in the room, and we have some people who are more visual. So I welcome the idea of what would it look like to change this, and does it need to be, do we need to have one ladder that integrates the best of all of these different ones, or do we need to get rid of the ladder and think of something else?
That's a hard question.
Yeah.
So have you studied like community psychology, Mark?
Only a little.
Well, because I mean, I don't know. I think the psychology plays a role here too. You know, some people are very conditioned to be, followers or passive and kind of take instruction from authority. Others are very, get up and assertive, confident. I mean, there's a lot of factors there that can affect where a person, how they behave, and in turn communities. I mean, I'm sure you know that. I'm just making.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Well, and we in our school, we do a lot of teaching around the whole notion of empowerment and what does that mean. And it's, some argue you can't empower anyone. You can create opportunities for people to empower themselves. And there's a whole notion about what that process looks like. And it's both a psychological process, but it's also a capacity process and building people's skills and knowledge up. All of those things help people move. And so these tools are all have to take that process into account, which I don't think the tools really address.
Yeah.
So to reply to the earlier question, I don't think I'm just now brainstorming, but I think that either ladder, vertical or circular, are probably obsolete. It's more, I think the diagram is going more toward a sort of network of bubbles that interact one another, smaller and bigger. And they are probably also different. I mean, I don't think there's just one. We probably have, just because of the nature of a reticular system, you can have a very endless combinations of how these bubbles become smaller or bigger. So I don't know, it's difficult. I think you need to write, or we, all of us, provide a guideline to design it in terms of, let's say, network of systems, but then everyone will probably develop in a very specific way according to what they are doing in specific.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with Carla. It's I tend to go more circular. In my experience with my office, we did a similar exercise, of course, and there were a lot of parameters. So the ladder wasn't working. The circular works more. That it works better because you can continuously create circles, but then the relationships between the elements in the circle becomes very complex. So what helped us a lot was because the circles were becoming a mess and really we couldn't read them anymore. And so we were having to go out of the paper, One thing that helped was the digital world, that you can start clicking and the click was referring to another world. And probably this other world is a bubble, like Carla Carla is referring to. So it is a sequence of interactive elements that maybe they look at the beginning, they start very simple as a circle, but then they develop into a more complex sequence of bubbles, circles. It really doesn't matter the form. What is important is the clarity. And I think the digital world really helps with that, because the more you interact with the community, the more data you accumulate. Well, that was our problem really, to how to organize all that data.
Yeah, I think too, if I really appreciated the point that it's very important to be clear about what the purpose of each of the ladder is. So if there were an exercise to create something like a ladder that was more community facing and less of the ABCD practitioner facing, so less what we're using ourselves, but more to use as a tool when talking with community members. I think it's really important for people to be able to see themselves in a variety of roles and to not have an idea that there's just this one movement from victim toward advocate or leader, because not everyone wants that role, but they may want a different role. There was something, I'm not sure did any of you see the 2-hour special on Toni Morrison last night on PBS? It might not have, it probably would, it was in Atlanta last night, but if you can catch it, try to. But one of the things that struck me was she talked about how she came to see her role as an editor of Black activists as her role. She was not going to be in the streets, and she was in Manhattan at a publishing house watching feminists and Black power leadership marching in the streets, and knew that that was not her and she wasn't going to be there. But her role was to publish them. She talked Angela Davis into writing her autobiography. So, you know, there's lots of different roles and lots of different ways of viewing leadership. And I wonder if that, you know, that single ladder gives a particular vision of what leadership is that might be a little bit too narrow.
That's very well said. That might be the closing comment, Rebecca. That was beautiful.
That was not my intention.
Yeah, it was great. I really appreciate everyone joining us, and I know some people had to leave for other sessions. I found this extremely useful, both in terms of preparing for the session, but then being in the breakouts and hearing the report out. I think we're on to something. And, you know, I don't remember if it was Carla, maybe you said it. I think it is a collective effort, and we would love to have people contribute to what does a future tool look like? And maybe we need multiple tools, a tool for practitioners, a tool for educators and practitioners might be the same tool, might be different tools, but then a tool that can be used for and by a community themselves on what they want to see happen in their community. And I like the notion that we're not driving to one single point at the top, but there's multiple roles, and there's always, when you create a hierarchy, there's always a sense that you're not enough unless you get to the top. And so I think that's a really good point. So I think with that, we're done, and maybe I'll see some of you in some of the other sessions. So thank you all for participating, and be sure to send your notes and your selfies to your little screenshots to Evie's, and we look forward to